It is 1174, late summer evening, inside the royal council chamber. You are standing beside the throne, closer to the king than any of the men arguing in front of you. The generals are stressed, the barons are louder, every single one of them is asking the same question without saying it directly. How long does he actually have? The boy on the throne is 13 years old and already a king, and you are the only person in this room who actually knows the answer. They are all afraid to ask you for it. Level 1, the first sign. Your fingers press against a boy's forearm, searching for the wince that never comes. He is 9 years old, thin, dark-haired, the son of King Amalric, and one of his companions in the training yard just scratched him hard enough to draw blood without the boy noticing. You test the arm again with the point of a stylus. Nothing, no flinch, no complaint, only wide brown eyes waiting for you to explain why you are frowning. You have trained in Salerno, you have read Avicenna, you have watched leprosy eat through beggars outside the gates of Jerusalem 100 times. The fingers going first, then the nose, then the voice. You have never once expected to find it here, pressed into the skin of a future king. You tell his tutors it is nothing, a nerve, perhaps, from a fall. You do not believe your own words even as you say them, and neither, you suspect, does the boy watching your face for the truth you are already hiding. That night you write nothing down. You burn the wax tablet you started twice. In the kingdom of Jerusalem, a diagnosis is not medicine. It is a weapon, and whoever holds it can end a marriage, a war, a succession. With a single sentence spoken in the wrong room, you have just become the only person in this city who knows something a king would kill to keep buried. You have not yet decided if you will ever say it out loud. Level 2, the sentence. Your hands smell of vinegar and burnt herbs. By the time you finally know for certain, 4 years have passed since the training yard. The boy is 13 now, and the patch of numb skin has spread from his forearm to his hip, pale, faintly rippled, cold to the touch, in a way healthy flesh never is. You have consulted physicians who trained in Cairo. You have compared his skin under lamplight to drawings smuggled out of Constantinople. There is no other name for what you are looking at, leprosy. The word alone empties rooms in this kingdom faster than plague, because plague kills quickly and mercifully, while this disease unmakes a person slowly in front of everyone. For years, you are the one who has to say it to King Amalric, alone, in a chamber with the door barred from the inside. He does not shout. He goes very still instead, the way men go still right before they understand they cannot fight the thing in front of them with a sword. He makes you swear silence on your own life. You swear it easily, because you already understand what you are protecting is not just a boy's dignity. It is a crown, a bloodline, an entire kingdom's fragile peace with its own barons, all of it now balanced on your willingness to lie convincingly for the rest of your career. You leave that room a different kind of physician. You are no longer treating a patient, you are managing a secret with a heartbeat. Level 3, the keeper of secrets. This is how the world around Baldwin actually decides what to do with sickness like his. Not with medicine, not with mercy, but with walls. Lepers in this kingdom are stripped of property, forced to wear bells to announce their approach, herded into the leper hospital of St. Lazarus outside the city walls to live and die among people the rest of the world has agreed to forget on purpose. The law does not bend for a king's son. It exists precisely so that no one, not even a king's son, feels safe. You begin to understand this not as cruelty, but as fear given the shape of a system, an entire civilization terrified of a disease it cannot explain, deciding it is easier to banish the sick than to sit with the not knowing. This is the machine you are now hiding a future king inside of. You attend council meetings and say nothing when barons debate his marriage prospects. You review letters describing him to foreign courts as strong and healthy, knowing every word is a lie you personally helped manufacture. You watch his sister Sibylla being groomed for a marriage that will matter enormously the moment her brother's body fails, and you say nothing about that either. You have become fluent in the particular silence of men who know exactly how a story ends and are paid, in trust rather than coin, to keep telling everyone it has not started. Level 4, the architect of denial. You try everything by the time Baldwin turns 15, because doing nothing feels like a second diagnosis. You refuse to also be guilty of. You bleed him according to the 4 humors, drawing blood from his arm into a bronze bowl until his lips go pale. You pack the numb patches and poultices of crushed herbs and animal fat that do nothing but smell of rot. Within a day, you write to physicians in Antioch and receive back recipes involving viper flesh and gold dust that you administer anyway. Because hope, even fake hope, is still something you can hand a boy who has started noticing his own fingers differently than he used to. None of it works. The disease does not care about bronze bowls or viper flesh, or your reputation as the man who is supposed to be curing him. It moves at its own pace, patient in a way you have never had the luxury of being. What you actually give him during these years is not medicine. It is the appearance of a fight being fought, which turns out to matter to him more than you expected. He thanks you for trying, even when your treatments leave him weaker than before you touched him. You start to understand a truth no medical text ever taught you at Salerno, that sometimes your real job is not healing a body, it is standing beside someone, so they do not have to face the thing alone, even when standing beside him means causing him more pain in the process. Level 5, the crown's secret. Amalric dies suddenly in July, of dysentery, not a disease you had any part in. And within days the crown that was always theoretical becomes real weight on a body you know is already failing. Baldwin is 13 years old when he is anointed King of Jerusalem, and you stand near enough during the ceremony to see his hands trembling under the weight of a scepter he can technically no longer fully feel. The barons circle within a week, regency councils form and dissolve. Raymond of Tripoli positions himself as the sensible cousin who can rule until the boy is old enough, which everyone in that room understands is a polite way of saying, until the boy dies. An outcome you alone know is coming faster than anyone else has been told. You become something stranger than a physician now. You are consulted before military decisions because your face, more than anyone else's, betrays how many good years might actually remain. You watch grown men study your expression the way sailors study weather before deciding whether to sail. You never let your face tell them anything. This is the exact moment from the council chamber you remember most clearly. Years later, standing closer to the throne than any general in the room. The only person who knows the true answer to the question no one dares ask out loud. Level 6, the warrior's doctor. You beg him not to ride to Montgisard. He is 16 now. His right hand already curling inward at the fingers, in ways he hides inside a glove, even in summer heat. And Saladin's army outnumbers his own by a wide margin according to every count your scouts bring back. He looks at you the way he has started looking at everyone who tries to manage him instead of serve him, and he tells you that a king who hides is already dead, so he might as well die doing something worth remembering. You ride with the column anyway because someone has to be close enough to catch him if his body fails before the enemy does. Near a fortress called Montgisard, a small force of his men crash into a Muslim army many times their size, and somehow, against every calculation you privately made the night before, they break Saladin's army entirely. Baldwin, weakened, half numb, barely able to grip his own reins, personally leads a charge that chroniclers will still be writing about centuries later. He returns from that battlefield more famous than his own father ever was. You are the one who has to change the dressing on hands that fought a battle they could no longer properly feel. Glory, you learn that night, does not ask permission from the body carrying it. It simply happens. And afterwards, someone quiet has to clean up what the triumph actually cost. Level 7, the vanishing man. By 19, he can no longer see the seal he presses onto his own royal decrees. The disease has reached his eyes, clouding them slowly, the way frost creeps across glass overnight without anyone watching it happen. 2 fingers on his right hand are gone entirely now, lost not to violence, but to numbness that let infection do its work unnoticed until amputation was the only option left. You perform that amputation yourself, rather than let a lesser hand near him, and he does not cry out during it, because by now he has stopped feeling most of what happens to that hand at all. This is how the kingdom around him actually survives these years, propped up entirely on the fiction that a functioning king still governs from that throne. In truth, councils write the decrees, regents fight over Sibylla's marriage, which will decide who inherits everything the moment Baldwin's body finally loses its long argument with itself. You know, better than any baron plotting in the corridors, exactly how much time that argument has left. And you have started lying about it even to yourself, he asks you directly one evening. Blind eyes turn toward the sound of your voice instead of your face. Whether you think he will see 40, you tell him, yes, you have never told a more merciful lie in your life, and you have never hated yourself more for how easily it came. Level 8, carried into the light. He cannot walk anymore, cannot see, can barely close what remains of his right hand around anything at all. And still he orders the litter prepared when word arrives that Karak Castle is under siege and his own men are dying without him. You argue against it in front of the entire council, and lose because he has stopped asking your permission for anything years ago. Soldiers carry him the whole distance on a covered litter, curtains drawn against the dust, his body wrapped and cushioned like something too precious and too broken to survive an ordinary journey. When the army arrives, he has the curtains pulled back anyway, so the defenders on the walls can see. Their king has come for them in person, blind, dying, carried like a relic, and it works. The besieging army withdraws rather than face a garrison that just watched its ruined king refuse to abandon them. You ride beside the litter the entire way home, one hand resting near enough to catch him if the movement of the road becomes too much for a body. This far gone, you remember pressing 2 fingers against his wrist years ago in a training yard, searching for a pulse that felt wrong even then. You press 2 fingers against that same wrist now. You feel almost nothing beneath the skin anymore. And yet somehow, impossibly, the man attached to it just saved a fortress full of strangers who will never know his name the way you do. Level 9, the Undying Name. He dies in March 1185, 24 years old, in a chamber you have sat beside more nights than you can accurately count anymore. His body by the end weighs almost nothing, wasted past recognition from the boy who once flinched at nothing in a training yard. So many years earlier, you are the one holding his wrist when it happens. 2 fingers pressed exactly where you pressed them that very first afternoon. Searching then for a pulse that felt wrong, and searching now for any pulse at all. There is a long moment of absolutely nothing beneath your fingers before you finally accept what your hands already know. The kingdom he leaves behind will not survive him by even 3 full years before Saladin retakes Jerusalem entirely, and every regent who circled his throne while he was dying will be scattered, defeated, or dead within a decade, their names already fading from anything but dusty charters. Nobody reads, but his name does not fade the same way. People who never met him will keep telling the story of the Leper King who led a charge at Montgisard, who let himself be carried blind into a siege rather than abandon his men, who ruled a body in open rebellion against itself for over a decade without once asking to be pitied for it. You outlive him by many years, treating other patients, other kings, none of whom ever once made you feel like you were standing beside something the world would still be talking about centuries later. You set his wrist down gently on the blanket. Somewhere outside, a bell begins to ring, quiet, unhurried, exactly the way a door closes softly in a house that has just emptied out.